Hey girl, hey! I am so excited to be bringing a podcast to the world. I have tried and stopped and started with podcasting in the past, and I am a natural born yapper. In fact, it's one of the reasons I should have known, or not me, but my family should have known I had ADHD when I was a child because all I liked to do was yap. So I am going to yap with you every week. And today's episode is really a vulnerable share. I wanted to start this podcast with a story that I've never shared before. Not for any particular reason, it is a vulnerable share, but being an ADHD girly, I don't find being an open book and vulnerable that difficult. In fact, I tend to overshare and trauma dump. So anyway, I thought I would share where this whole journey started in terms of discovering cash stuffing and also working on my money mindset and my nervous system regulation and all the things. So grab your favorite beverage. I have a iced latte here today. For anyone who doesn't know me, hey, hello, my name is Kaila. I am a 35-year-old mum of two, ADHD girly here in the top end of Australia. And I talk about money. I want to empower women around money because I have been the woman who was not empowered about money and believed that, I was bad with numbers and I was just no good with money and I didn't know what I was doing, and left it to my partner, assuming that he knew what was going on. And whilst he's brilliant, I realised that that's not the way it works. So I want to share with you why I am shifting. If you've been around, you will know that I have been in the cash stuffing world for about 4, maybe almost 5 years now. And that came from necessity. I needed to find a way to budget, and we'd never really budgeted in the past. We just kind of lived paycheck to paycheck. We'd always made things work and gotten by. We'd had bills paid and, some fortnights were tight and others were great. But we've both been in pretty well-paying jobs. And so it never came up as a need. Our financial literacy was pretty shit. And yeah, we were just getting by. My partner definitely more investment minded than me. He had a couple of properties when we had gotten together, and so that obviously helped with buying our house here in Darwin and all the things. But other than that, there was no real sort of savings happening, no real investments or anything like that. It was just living paycheck to paycheck. And I found cash stuffing when we were hit with a decrease in income. I was in a position where I couldn't work. So we were reduced to a single income. We had both of our kids, and it was potentially some of the worst. It was the worst period of my life. And that's saying a lot because I've been through some pretty shitty things in my life, but that was definitely the low of the low. And I can still really sort of viscerally remember the guilt and the shame of not being able to afford things like groceries, being in financial hardship with our mortgage. And yeah, it was really tough. It was really, really tough. So I want to share with you what that period was like, and how I know that if you're in that period right now, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. I know it feels in that moment like, you can't see a way out. You can't see how things will change. You sort of get caught up in the emotions of shame and guilt, and it feels really defeating. It feels really, really hard, and it feels like there's never going to be a way out. But 4 years later, we are in a completely different situation. I have quit my 9 to 5, which was a pretty well-paying 9 to 5, and I'm going all in my business, and we are back to a single income, but this time things are massively different. There is no guilt or shame. There is no inability to afford groceries. There is no financial hardship around our mortgage. In fact, we have an investment property, so we have 2 mortgages, and life is good. I want to paint a bit of a picture of what it felt like and looked like at the time. So it was about 4 years ago. I couldn't work and we were relying on my partner's paycheck, and he'd always been in pretty good paying jobs, and he was in a less well paying job, and which was fine until it wasn't. And so we had both of our kids. They would have been around 2 and 5 at the time. And it was just us. We live in Darwin. We live away from family and all the things. And at this time, I would have to ring family to ask for loans of money. As I said, we had to put our mortgage on hold. We had to really look at all the subscriptions that we had to get rid of. And, it was dicey. Our kids go to a school that we pay fees for. And I think one of the main priorities was keeping my daughter in her daycare, even though it was costing us money and I was at home, just to maintain some sort of normalcy and consistency for our kids. We really didn't want them to feel like things were any different. So she did still attend her daycare. Granted, we live in Australia, so luckily my CCS increased because I wasn't able to work. So that helped for sure. And as I said, if things had got really, really, really dire, I would have pulled her out. But she was in a family daycare that she really loved. So that was something that we wanted to maintain for her. And our son was at school. And as I said, we pay school fees for him to be there. For them both to be there now. But we didn't want to change his school to a government school just so we didn't have to pay fees and all those sorts of things. We were just trying to maintain as much normalcy as possible. But underneath that, right, so to the outside world, it didn't look that different. I was still driving the same car and the kids were still going to their same school and daycare, and, things kind of looked the same. Nothing really changed to the outside world. But things on the inside and things inside our home changed massively. One of the biggest things that sort of stands out to me from this time period is walking around the grocery aisles with my calculator out on my phone. And I'd never been in a position where I had to calculate. And this definitely comes from a place of privilege. I can appreciate that. But I had never been in a position where I had to calculate how much was going into the trolley. And I had my calculator out. And I would have to, even to the point of weighing like fruit and veggies to get the exact dollar and cents amount that it was going to cost for the groceries that I was putting into my shopping cart, for fear that I would get to the checkout and my card would decline and I'd have to, you sort of see in the movies, like take things away to make the total come down so that I could afford it. And I was petrified of that happening, petrified that even having money in a certain account and then a bill or a subscription coming out that I didn't remember because I have ADHD. And, then I would have less money for things like groceries. And so it was a really challenging time. I would be awake at 3 a.m. when everybody else was asleep. And just, I remember laying there just having this like mental sort of moving things around and what income was coming in and which bills could be paid with that particular amount of money, keeping aside things for like groceries and petrol and, how we were going to make this payment, or whether that payment had to wait, or whether I would have to, communicate with a certain council or whatever that we would have to push our payments out, and just less stress of laying there at night when, you should be able to sleep, doing the mental gymnastics of trying to figure out what bills can be paid and what can't be paid. And then the flow on, the ripple of that is the shame of like, I can't afford my bills. I think the biggest sort of shame came from having children, being responsible for the children and not being able to provide for them. And it's not so dire, right? Like we weren't living off of like peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. So I guess it's all relative, right, to what you're used to and all of that. So don't get me wrong, we still very much came from a place of privilege, but just I know that feeling of like, how am I responsible for these 2 kids and I can't feed them, like I can't afford to just go to the grocery store and buy them food. And, it's just this really complex kind of situation of like ringing family for $100 just to be able to go and get some extra fruit and veggies to get through the week. And I think no matter what that situation looks like, that feeling is really similar in, you're responsible for these people, these tiny little humans, and just feeling so flat and defeated. And yeah, I remember standing in the kitchen with my husband, partner, we're not married, and just at the time, tears rolling down my face thinking, I can't, how did we get here? How did we get to this point where I'm using Afterpay for groceries, which makes zero financial sense in the sense that groceries don't last as long as the Afterpay payments, right? But I just couldn't figure out how to make it work. And so we did all sorts of things. I went and bought a deep freezer for, $200, because then in my mind I was like, well, then I can, buy cheaper cuts of meat when they're on sale and in bulk, and I can freeze them. We didn't have a lot of freezer space and all those sorts of things where I was trying to cut down the costs that we had, get rid of all the subscriptions. So instead of having Netflix and Stan and KO and YouTube and all the things, we were really reduced to just Netflix or whatever it is. So cutting down all those sorts of things. I remember changing over my phone. So my phone plan had run out. And so I just continued using my old phone and went to prepaid instead. And that's something we've kept. We're both on prepaid now. We don't have phone plans because it was costing us $250 a month for our phones, and just instead it could cost us $300 for the year for prepaid credit. So there were all sorts of things that I did to really try and reduce the amount of money that we were spending each pay cycle. But that only got me so far. Like, you can only cut down so much whilst your kind of income stays the same. And the same with like side hustles. I know everyone's like, diversify your income, and that's all great, but there's also only so much you can kind of bring in, and hustle and all the things. So the one thing that kind of shifted for me was I recognized that we were in this kind of position, but we were only going to get so far with cutting out things and shuffling things around and putting things on hold and, all that sort of stuff. But really, really this was a bigger issue. And the real issue was feeling safe around money. And I felt really disempowered around money. And that stems from childhood. It stems from experiences. It's in my nervous system. It was in my beliefs around myself and my beliefs around money, and even my beliefs around sort of receiving and feeling supported and all those sorts of things. So I recognized, as I started to dive a bit deeper, I started to turn to cash stuffing. Was something that I got into in that sense of the financial literacy and the structure, the strategy that I had around, working with my money. So that was the kind of 3D tangible stuff that was helping me. And whilst I was YouTubing a lot of the cash stuffing, I sort of entered this community of just women who were documenting their own journeys of how they were managing their money. And I felt really seen and supported. I think the cash stuffing community is such a beautiful one in the sense that there's women from all walks of life. There's all sorts of income levels and, different priorities and goals. But it was just listening to them and their stories and how they were approaching things that really, really helped me feel seen and feel validated. There was people I was watching who were, budgeting channels. But then as you kind of work with the algorithm, right, and it learns what you're interested in, there were things that were coming up around sort of money mindset and also limiting beliefs. And I'd done a little bit of work on sort of that kind of limiting beliefs and childhood trauma and all sorts of things in like life coaching I have done in the past. So I kind of already had an awareness of this, but I hadn't really sort of matched it up or aligned it with money. I had always thought of it in terms of like my personal relationships, my parenting, how I show up in the world, but I hadn't really looked at what that meant for money. And really it's funny because it's all so interconnected. So I find that the more I work on my relationship with myself, the better my relationship with my husband becomes, the better my relationship with my children, but also transforms my relationship with money, work, business, all the things. It's all interconnected, right? Because we are such complex beings. It's not in isolation. Often when one thing changes, there's this kind of domino effect for everything else in your life. And so I really started to focus on my mindset. I really started to focus on where I was leaking kind of my energy and becoming really cynical and pessimistic and negative. And, instead of what's the saying, like where energy flows, or where what is it? Where I can't remember the exact saying from off the top of my head, but it's essentially what you focus on becomes you experience more of it, right? So if I wallowed in this kind of self-pity and shame and guilt and, all these really negative kind of low vibration sort of feelings and emotions, then I was just going to continue to have more and more and more of that. And so without sort of leaning into toxic positivity, because we're not about that over here. We don't do toxic positivity at all. We feel our feels, and they're totally okay. They're valid and all the things. But it wasn't about being positive for positivity's sake. It was about recognizing that I still had so much in my life. I still had an abundance in other ways. So the money wasn't necessarily there, but there was so much else. There was so much love and there was so much joy in other moments that I really clung to those things, and I started to focus more on, what could I be really grateful for that I had, instead of looking only at the scarcity and the lack, because the more we focus on that, the more we're going to experience it. And I didn't want that. I wanted to shift out of that, feeling really down and really just yuck and really low, and feeling of I was in this like victim, like, why is this happening to me, and why is this happening to us, and how did we get here, and it feels like it's never going to end, and we're always going to be just stuck in this position. And so that was one thing, right? Like my mindset around it really shifted, and I recognized that I needed to get out of this negativity and I needed to shift my mindset. But on top of that, there was this underlying, I recognized that I also was stuck in this nervous system response. So our nervous system is a really protective, ecological part of our bodies. And essentially it's to keep us safe, right? So we have the nervous system responses or activations of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And so I recognized that I was very much in a freeze state, which is very much my go-to nervous system. When I'm activated, that is, pretty much my response to everything. And it was interesting that there was no bear chasing me, there was no lion, there was no, shooter in my house like that, but the threat level felt the same in my nervous system. And so I very much was shutting down, and I was in this freeze. I could do the bare minimum to get by, but I was very much not, I was not in sort of present in my life and in the interactions. Like I wasn't there for my children. I was just in this really frozen response. And what's interesting is I'm actually currently consciously regulating my nervous system, because I have found myself in the same freeze response. And so I will share what I'm doing to get out of that in future episodes, so stay tuned. But I recognized those two things. So my mindset was negative and I needed to shift it. And I hope you can hear me, because the rain is just pummeling down. As I just said before, that the rains had stopped. Of course, here comes the rains again. And so I'm sitting like there's a window directly in front of me, and it is just absolutely pissing. So I hope you can still hear me. But the two things, mindset and nervous system. And see, this is the thing. You can't actually have more if you're feeling, if your body feels unsafe. And so this is the biggest thing that I want to educate women about and help them get to the other side of that really dark place. And you don't have to be in a space where, you're after paying your groceries and, you've got your calculator out. I mean, that is definitely a feeling that I think a lot of us have felt at some point, but it may not be that is your current situation. It may be that you're living paycheck to paycheck and things are just not really, you're not feeling like you're getting anywhere, or you're not living the life that you really feel like you could be, or you just recognize that when you're opening your internet banking, you have that sort of heart rate spike and you do feel a bit activated. And yeah, it's about how do we get out of that And I can tell you from experience that the key is money mindset and nervous system work. So it is identity and nervous system that will get you to where you want to be and feeling confident and calm. And I'm not talking like millionaire overnight, right? Because I think a lot of us are like, I just want to win the lotto so I can stay home and I don't have to work and I can not worry about money and all my bills will be paid and blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, you think that, but whilst your nervous system is activated, you're actually, if you won that millions of dollars, you would spend it in a heartbeat. It's why so many lottery winners end up bankrupt years later, right? Like just a few years later, and they've lost everything, is because a lot of us consciously want lots of money, but we have a lot of limiting beliefs. If you don't know what a limiting belief is, I have a YouTube video on my channel that is all about limiting beliefs and where they come from, and I'm going to re-record that actually at some point, so it will come up again. But a lot of us carry money stories and imprints from childhood and also from societal conditioning. And so whilst you think consciously, I would love $1 million or even more now, because let's be real, $1 million is no longer the set for life money amount that, it used to be. But you have to regulate first in order to actually, probably call in that money, and also B, to utilize it and have it support you instead of panic spending and then being back to square one, or even worse, to worse off than you were before. In this story, I hope you feel seen and validated for those feelings, and for, you're not broken. You're not bad with money. You're not bad at maths. It's not a problem of your own making. This is something that a lot of women carry because of societal conditioning, because of the experiences we've had. A lot of us have been told, that money is like the man's job, and that women are no good at maths. Like, how many times, even as a teacher, boys are good at maths and girls are good at like creative aspects. Like, it's something that a lot of us have been conditioned to think, that we're no good with money, or that we're no good with numbers, or we're no good with maths, or we're just, we're no good, full stop. Like, let's be real. So, and then to pile on top of that, a lot of the ways that we deal with our own money situation come from the way our parents or our caregivers dealt with money. So I know in my house, money was super stressful. My dad, every month when he got the credit card bill, would go off his rocker because he was so stressed about money. He owned a business and he was supporting our family on his own. And so every month when that credit card bill came, at some points it got physical between my mum and dad. So, there's stories and like beliefs that I have held that money isn't safe. And so how could I possibly have more when my nervous system goes, no, if you have more money, you're in danger, and our nervous system is going to keep us safe. So there's no way I'm going to experience more when that feels super unsafe. Anyway, I hope that, as I said, that this episode has been helpful in the fact that you feel seen and validated. If you're experiencing that right now, that shame and that guilt, I want you to know that 4 years on, my life is completely different, and yours can be too. And it's not about being a millionaire overnight. It's not about, having thousands and thousands of dollars rolling in every day and all of that, because that would feel really unsafe to your nervous system. It's about becoming calm. It's about feeling confident and calm, checking your bank account with no heart rate spike. It's about sleeping through the night, or at least as much as you can, without doing sort of the mental gymnastics of which bills are going to be paid by this paycheck and which ones are going to have to wait until the next one, and how are we going to afford groceries. It's about not having your calculator out in the grocery aisle, not having to weigh your fruit and veggies or put back your favorite brands because they're too expensive. It's about not freaking out that the petrol prices are absolutely astronomical at the moment. It's about feeling like no matter what comes your way, you're going to be able to solve it. That there is, if an unexpected bill rocks up, there is no activation. It's just, okay. It is what it is. That is the goal, right? That is the first goal, at least. If you want to be rich, by the way, over here on my channel, we are all about, there is no shame in wanting to be rich. In fact, that's a nice little segue. I have a program coming. It is a really small group coaching program because this is a beta round, which means it is in its first iteration, and it's going to be called Regulated and Rich. And when I sat with that, I was like, I don't know if rich is the right word, but honestly, I am here to take away the taboo from all the things. And if you want to be a millionaire, a billionaire, fucking let's do it. Honestly, the more money in the hands of really good people is only a good thing. And so there is no shame here about being rich. When I have more money, I give more generously. I, am able to spoil my friends. I am able to give to charity. I am able to go above and beyond. And so I have learnt that that's just another one of those programming, conditioning things that society tells us that rich people are greedy and evil, and that's just not true. So Regulated and Rich is coming. I'm so excited. I'm so excited for this podcast. I'm so excited to sit and yap with you. And I'm so excited to have more women who feel calm and confident and empowered with money. So thank you so much for joining me. I have absolutely loved this little yap. Let me know. Find me on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, comment down below. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music, then you can find me on socials. Send me a DM and let me know how this landed for you, and also what you'd love to hear on the podcast, because at the end of the day, I am here for you. I hope you have an amazing week, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.